Mindcrime Liberty Show with me, Swithin Dobson, and him, Tim Patton. Today we're joined by Duncan Whitmore to discuss crypto skepticism. Duncan Whitmore is an esteemed member of Mises UK and a very good essayist who writes on many different subjects on libertarianism for Mises UK, which I would very much suggest checking out. But today, the basis of our discussion was his excellent essay on crypto skepticism, and so we thought we'd discuss lots of things relating to crypto and money in general. So, Tim.
So money itself is an interesting phenomenon to begin with, and before we discuss crypto, I think it's sort of short discussion of money in itself, as crypto is a kind of money. So in general, what my answer to what is money? Traditionally, it's been gold, copper. You know, there's other things anthropologists might find, shells. There's some other things the Romans might have used, Greeks, and then most recently paper. Now, most monetary historians would say that it was notes in the bank to redeem for gold and something like that. Now, money in this form is useful. It's very liquid. Double coincidence once problem. It holds value. So those are some general aspects why you need it. You don't need a buckskin or something like that. So in general, I would assume you're in favor of money, the existence of commodity of money. So along comes crypto. Crypto is a recent technology in the past 20 years. No one really knows who created Bitcoin. And now there's like 1,600 and counting different types of cryptos. Bitcoin has like 50% of the market share, Ethereum, and some others out there. So in general, opening up, what is your thoughts on money itself? And then what is your thoughts on Bitcoin and crypto at all? Duncan?
Well, first of all, thank you both for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, with money itself, obviously, as you say, money is essential for an extensive division of labour. If we didn't have money, there would only be a very basic barter economy, probably based on very repetitive and very certain in a limited scope of bilateral transactions, whereas money allows for a much wider extent of the division of labour, so that you don't have those problems. And it's potentially up to the entire world, of course. So you can ship goods from abroad, and rather than within your just own locality, where you'd probably have to be restricted to transactions with just a very few people. Cryptocurrency itself, it's a very interesting invention, and I think I think it is marvelous from the point of view that it does. First, as libertarians, I presume we're all libertarians here, aren't we?
That's correct.
Yeah. I think it's. I don't think as libertarians we should be too hung up on, say, our favourite monetary medium as being sort of gold or silver or whatever. It's really up to the market to decide. And so I think that one of the problems that a lot of gold bugs have been having at the moment is, of course, crypto's been taking off and gold's been going down, and it's like their favorite yellow metal is not having its sort of day in the sun, as it were. But I think we should recognize this potential of Bitcoin to alert people to the freedom of money generally, I think, because it is something that's not been it's not been recognized to the same extent as other freedoms. So, for instance, in the US Constitution, you have the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, and yet the freedom of money doesn't take any similar prestigious place in that. And I think it's been one of the grave misfortunes of history, actually, that the freedom of money has not been taken seemingly more seriously. And that's been something that's compounded by economic theory, because even in the 20th century, pro-free market economists such as Milton Friedman, for instance, however much they might have said many wonderful things about privatizing schools or whatever, or anything else that the government might care to do itself. They've always made an exception when it's come to the issue of money, which is actually handed to the state an enormous amount of power, because if you can just print your currency, then you don't it gives you a lot more ability to sort of circumvent the problem of having to tax your citizenry, and that's really responsible for the incredible growth of the state, or one of the reasons why the state has grown so much during the 20th century. And so I just think that if Bitcoin causes people, or any other cryptocurrency causes people to seek an alternative to fiat money, state fiat money, and gets people thinking about, well, where does money actually come from? What is money, and all of that? Even if in and of itself it doesn't end up succeeding as a replacement to state fiat money, I think that it's we should recognize that as a potential achievement, whatever happens.
I would agree with respect to Bitcoin and crypto in general, as opening up the space for non-state monies, or at least bringing that to the fore. I think that's important, and I think in general, just the existence of crypto does shine a light on the astonishing inflationary policies of the Western economies, particularly in America and England. If I remember correctly, now depending on which measure of money supply, I don't remember which one it was, that 20% of all dollars ever created were created in 2020, which is just like the most crazy money printing that is just off the scale. And so anything that sort of brings that to prominence, I think, is a good thing. And as Duncan says, what matters really is what the market decides on money. The question is, on what basis would we expect the market to choose a money? I think I came up with, these are basically standard, but it'd be interesting to see if you would add anything to these. We want money to be sort of divisible. We want to be able to break it down into smaller units, because it makes it easier to trade with, because you don't have to. This is the reason why you want to use a cow as money, for many other reasons, because half a cow isn't worth half a cow, well, depending on what you're using for it. Durability, you want to be able to hold value in it. Cows die, not a good money. You're going to want a stable supply of some description, so the value holds. You don't want something typically that's going to have a very volatile supply, because that's going to mess up the purchasing power. You're going to want it to be portable, again, for the same reason cows are bad. And then, so those are sort of standard ones, but two other ones I think are particularly more relevant and come up to some extent with Bitcoin and crypto is privacy. I think in general, a more market-based society would want financial privacy, and a currency which affords more private transactions would one which would be, everything else being equal, preferred by the market. And then related to the sort of store of value thing is you want to be secure. You want to be able to make sure that your currency won't be stolen, and you know that it's there when you need to use it. Would anybody add anything to that, or does that seem like an exhaustive list, or have I missed something? Tim or Duncan?
I think that's pretty exhaustive. Yes, I think it's interesting that you emphasise privacy, actually, because that's not something that's often raised a lot. And I agree with you. I think that a free society would be one where privacy is regarded with as a very valuable thing in and of itself, and that's not something that I'd actually I'd have to say I've not thought of directly in relation to money, actually. And so yes, sort of trading gold coins between, it's you can do that without any sort of oversight from the state or whatever. So no, I thought that was a very interesting one.
The reason I raise it is one of the arguments for crypto is the sort of imprint. Well, well, you can do it. Basically, you can be broadly anonymous with at least Bitcoin transactions if you do the appropriate groundwork beforehand and changing your public name on various transactions, if I remember correctly. So I thought that was an interesting additional consideration, because especially some of the crypto crowd really emphasize that. Tim.
So I read the essay you wrote for Mises UK is great, and one of the questions I first have, and I think a lot of crypto skeptics, I would say, need to answer is what exactly is your alternative to Bitcoin at all? I think it's a creative technology. I think it's a creative solution. Tyler Cowen asked the creator of Ethereum. He's a Russian guy. I cannot say his name. I'll just butcher it. He asked him, "Are you creating a state of some kind?" It might not have been Tyler Cowen, it might have been Brett Weinstein. He asked him, whichever one, the one that works with Peter Thiel. He asked him, like, "Are you creating a state?" Traditionally, states have had the ability to issue money. And so the technology itself is very sovereign. It's a very interesting technology, and I've been following the thing for a while to lay my cards out. I have benefited from it. I own some, not a huge amount of it. So I've liked the technology. I've liked the idea of it. I think it's sort of a diagonal way. And in the articles, you said that the state, you called them almost libertarian operators using private cryptocurrencies as somewhat useful idiots, developing acclimatize themselves to a new technology which will make it easier for the state to nudge in with its own version. That could be the case. But what do we do in the meantime? I mean, what do we do in the meantime? I think Bitcoin has made a dent in the currency market. I mean, people like Jeffrey Tucker says it exists. Many people didn't even think it could get off the ground. It's people do use it to get money in and out of Venezuela and China. Those are two instances where it's used. So then my thinking becomes, are you going to go back to gold? Now, I'm not against gold. That's the market choosing. But what? So my if I boil my comment / question down is, why be skeptical? First of all, why be skeptical? And second of all, what's the alternative in a sense? We don't exist in a vacuum. We haven't had gold for a while. So, Duncan?
Well, my skepticism, I should add, is limited very much to the possibility of Bitcoin becoming, cryptocurrency becoming money, which is the generally accepted medium of exchange. Whether it continues to exist in some other or for some other benefit as it's accepted as a medium of exchange between a limited number of people, or whether it's a speculative financial instrument, then I'm perfectly happy to say that yes, it would. It's likely to exist in that form going forward. So my skepticism is only just that only concerns its ability to become a generally accepted medium of exchange compared to alternatives such as gold or silver or the precious metals. At least that is when we don't really know what the state is going to do. And there's another thing I said in the article is the government could ban gold tomorrow, it could ban crypto tomorrow, it could tax either, it could regulate either. We just don't know how much the state is going to push people towards one or the other. So I'm perfectly happy to accept also that in a certain limited circumstances which are dictated by the state, that perhaps cryptocurrency will take off as a generally accepted medium of exchange. What any alternative would be, I think, if we just go back to those general. I mean, another thing I said also in the article is that one problem with cryptocurrency is that it requires such an extensive division of labor to have already been achieved before it can even operate. That means that it's already been it is inherent amount of uncertainty already built into its operation compared to something like, say, an ounce of gold, which you could just hold in your hand. And that's really what it all boils down to, is that there are so many, there are simpler alternatives. It's not saying that cryptocurrency is a bad invention at all. I don't. I think it's an astonishing invention. But when it comes to which is likely to be, which commodity is likely to serve as the medium of exchange, the question to ask is it more competitive than any alternative? Not is it good and just good in the abstract. And I just I think it's severely wanting from that point of view. I think it's also worth perhaps going back also into a sort of more philosophical question, which is can a monetary medium actually be invented as such? Because although Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, they operate on a decentralized network with various miners, various private parties, and so on, it is still an invention. And I having to wonder if money, like I suppose similar to language, is money something that people have invented, obviously, alternative languages like Esperanto, but none of them yet has been widely taken up or has been competitive with the existing languages that developed from the bottom up, even though they may be more perfect in terms of just how they sound, how they put together the grammatical rules or whatever. And I'm wondering if that also applies to. I think it might be Jesus Huerta de Soto actually calls Bitcoin Esperanto coin. I think it was him. I'll have to check that. So I think it's possible that the money may always be something that is actually selected by the market, and of course couldn't be refined by the market in the same way that gold was put into coins, and obviously had money substitutes and so on. But I have to wonder if money itself is ever something that can actually be invented.
On the division of labor, I would agree somewhat with what you said. I would, to somewhat we're debating, discussing the degree which would equal success. And on the point of the division of the labor, I would argue that wouldn't you say that gold itself? Now it is true that you go back to Roman society, you want to get something done. If you had a time machine, gold would get historically in many societies would get a lot done. It has had value at different times in history, but that's somewhat happenstance. And a lot of the crypto supporters would say that more people could mine the Pacific Ocean as well if gold's value went up. So to me, the argument for division of labor could cut both ways, and I would agree in general that it does require a high division of labor and high amount of technology. But in that sense, I'd just say that the whole society, that money itself is a kind of technology, especially storing money. Me and Swethan were talking about trying to get Walter Block on what exactly is savings. He is discussing savings, and we were saying that there's a big difference between saving 100 fiat dollars or fiat pounds or whatever, euros, and a big difference between saving 100 gallons of oil. 100, in a post-apocalyptic world, the 100 gallons of oil, or if you're Robinson Crusoe on his island, you don't want to have currency at all. You just want the fish or the oil. So your criticism on the digitization it's true, but then I would just say that it would just be more. We wouldn't use monetary forms. We just go back to more harder forms. What would you say to that, Duncan?
Yes, but again, I'd suggest that if we're discussing which of the two is more likely to become a generally accepted medium of exchange, it's which of the two is more likely to do so, and which of the two is more susceptible to uncertainties in the market. I mean, yes, okay, if we say that money itself is a technology and can only ever it will be used in sort of an extensive market, and if we did if our society did retrogress, then we'd probably use it in simpler forms. The question really is, out of the two, which is likely to be the one that provides the least bundle of uncertainties, if you like.
Yeah, I think that is. I would broadly agree with you, Duncan. I think your point that it's money that facilitates sort of civilization and division of labor seems to indicate that what money itself is a relatively rudimentary item or object, because that is that which facilitates everything else, rather than everything else facilitating its existence. Now, obviously, over time, you've got better ways of sort of producing better gold coins, which is mainly more durable. And you may have better ways of assaying whether it has the amount of gold in or silver or copper that it claims to have. But those are sort of relatively minor developments, at least relative to something like Bitcoin and in general. Now, I know in the essay you said this wasn't a decisive factor, you didn't really discuss it, although I do think it's interesting, and it does relate to the whole system when it comes to sort of Bitcoin, is the energy costs alone were estimated in an article I read to be somewhere in the region of $5 billion a year, which, may be a cheap, maybe cheap relative to protecting gold reserves, and also potentially cheap in relation to gold, the theoretical gold system with sort of electronic banking transfers alongside it. Because one thing that crypto is, as well as a currency, it's also a method of distribution. That's not probably the best term, but it's a way of paying people as well. It's a payment system, as well as being a money, which of course I think you would want to sort of disaggregate to some extent, or at least recognize with respect to gold or other sort of physical commodities. So I think that is, as it were, relevant to your point. Oh, and also when it comes to crypto, I suppose you could say it's good if it becomes so big, because then the Western governments might not try to rely on wind or solar so much. But I doubt it would. It will just mean that Bitcoin becomes even more expensive to maintain. That is, to run all the servers, etc. On the uncertainty point as well, Duncan, I think this is now how much this is a benefit, I don't know, but I think one of the reasons why one would like to keep your most of your sort of cash assets in gold, silver, or copper rather than crypto is that if the non-monetary demand for gold, silver, or copper drops, the value of your savings is not going to go to zero. If it's the case that the non-monetary demand for crypto disappears, the monetary demand for crypto disappears, the non-monetary demand for it is basically non-existent. It would just be a game. It would be an interesting thing to do. It wouldn't really have much value. And so I think that level of sort of security that you have, obviously everything else being equal, I mean, there could be factors that may take it into account, but I think that would give you at least an additional reason to hold on to something with a non-monetary value rather than one where almost 100% of it is just its monetary value. Do you have any comments on that, Duncan?
Yes, I mean, it's almost like in in some ways they've tried to make Bitcoin too perfect in a way, in the way that it's limited by the number of coins that can be produced, and it just has a pure monetary value and nothing else. It's all it's all sort of very well designed and well thought out, but is it actually appropriate for what people want as a medium of exchange? Just going back to a second to the issue of costs, actually. If I just clarify what I meant by that in the essay, it's not that I don't think the costs themselves are unimportant. It's more the fact that as economists, we can't necessarily say that a cost is not worth it for the users of what they. If they regard those costs as a benefit and they are willing to bear them, then we can't just say, as someone like Janet Yellen might, oh, Bitcoin costs too much, come and use our Federal Reserve digital equivalent or whatever. And because the same argument was, say, made against the gold standard, what's the point of digging up all this gold, digging it out of one hole, putting it into another hole and watching over it 24 hours a day? Such a waste of money when we can just have all this government issued paper. Was actually, we would probably think, well, that those costs are worth it to stop the horrendous amount of monetary inflation that our governments have inflicted upon us. And also going back to the possibility of the monetary value of Bitcoin going to zero, it's something that actually could happen. I think it could happen if there was just a power cut or something like what happened in Texas earlier this year. If the internet goes down, the electricity goes down, what are you going to use? Possibly in a situation where you need to get your hands on very basic goods very quickly, an emergency situation. So what happens then? I think that's a serious drawback for cryptocurrency, which again goes back to the fact that it's reliant upon an extensive division of labor, and if something happens like a hurricane or whatever that blows everything out, blows out all of your infrastructure, then you can't log on to your wallet or whatever. It's useless. You have to find something else very, very quickly. So whereas if you had gold coins, you could continue with the gold coin standard. An emergency situation, you'd essentially have to go back to barter again, and then eventually after that, maybe a monetary standard might come out relatively quickly, or people would have to probably go back to jewelry or whatever. But I think it would probably make emergency situations a lot more difficult if the world was to be on using cryptocurrency as its monetary standard.
The emergency situations has already happened in both Texas and in hurricanes. This has actually happened. And considering the reliance on credit cards, which have basically all the same attributes you're describing, credit cards and debit cards, to a extent, people could not purchase things if they didn't have hard currency. I think some stores have kept local ledgers based on honesty. I've heard reports of that during those kind of scenarios. The general, the power apocalypse. I think if a power apocalypse happens, if a sunspot, causes all of the servers in the world to disappear, I think that would also affect the fiat system too. That would affect most financial records. That would affect, what you're describing. If you're describing that the current world is fragile, I would agree. But so you have to sort of differentiate between which, what scale apocalypse are we predicting? I can predict a general decline of the U.S. as the global dollar, which is the current means of exchange. Yet, Bitcoin, or maybe one of its competitors, which is unknown, takes as a global exchange of some variety. I can envision that scenario happening. As long as I'm not I have not looked into the technology. As long as enough of the ledgers are, as long as it doesn't all get erased, then we're in okay. But that kind of scenario, then we would just go back to barter, and we may all starve to death anyway under that scenario if we just ran out of electricity because we can't process oil and we can't get fertilizer to grow enough food based on the yields we need. So yeah, I mean, under those scenarios, those to me aren't really arguments against Bitcoin; they're arguments against modernity. But one of the strengths of Bitcoin is, to me, is it's not tied to a government. That's probably the chief strength of Bitcoin. Although Peter Thiel says the Chinese are big investors in Bitcoin, although the U.S. Treasury probably owns Bitcoin, some amount of Bitcoin too. So lots of shadowy people own Bitcoin, as lots of people own Bitcoin, and the others, of course. So to me, the apocalypse lie, I just don't. That doesn't to me apply. As far as my scenario is that it takes over the dollar. Could that happen? I think it could happen. I think that's a fairly middle of the road scenario. Maybe it's impossible. But that's a medium term scenario. What do you make of that, Swithin? My scenario and Duncan's comments.
I think, if you have like a global sort of power cut or a global sort of electronic failure of some description, that's going to make a massive difference to modern society anyway. But is it more likely that you could get extended power outages in certain regions? I think yes. And now I didn't follow the Texas thing particularly closely, but I can imagine things like that would happen in the future. And I'd actually anticipate that more of them would happen, given the absurd use of unreliable energy sources such as wind and solar. And I think that could become more prevalent. And so the value that individuals would place on sort of anti-fragility, as it were, to use a Talebism, would be more highly valued. So I don't think you need to make the claim that the whole system will just not work. Rather, that when you need to engage in trades, in particular in an emergency situation, particularly to buy food and other sort of essential items, that you don't want the system to be completely gone. Now, that said, you could say, well, you could have like an emergency currency, but that's kind of strange as an idea, because an emergency, it would be odd that it would be immediately accepted, because the whole point of money is, well, it's just the thing that everybody uses and everyone accepts. And so for like an emergency currency to arise and that isn't normally traded would seem to be odd and would seem to take time to arise, which is something you wouldn't want to happen in an emergency situation for obvious reasons. Whether crypto can take on the dollar, possibly, I think unlikely. I think the only situation in which it does is if the dollar value goes so low that people just start switching away from it and using something else. But as of yet, the dollar is holding its value remarkably well, all things considered. And until you get to that point, I don't think people will. Also, we discussed on a previous episode with how to sort of return to like a sound banking system, monetary system. The issue that the US government demands its taxes in dollars means that the dollar demand is going to be vastly higher than it otherwise would be. And I think until the federal government decides that they'll accept payments in something other than fiat dollars, I think the dollar is here to stay for a while yet.
That to me is an argument against anarchism or against free markets. I just think you need to differentiate between the two. Again, it could be that the free market, if people in general decide that it's worth zero, and it is worth zero. But you see things like lawn and burger baskets or baseball cards or random abstract art, which is valued at millions of dollars. Those things have value. Are they money? You can redeem them for money. In that sense, money is a modern technology, this highly liquid thing that everyone accepts. I mean, funnily enough, when I was in Egypt, the only thing that many hotels and cab drivers would take was U.S. dollars and euros. I made a transaction to buy a cab from Aswan to Luxor in 3 different currencies, which was I thought was sort of remarkable. But then on the other hand, I could go full George Floyd and just print $20 bills off I wonder if they would have accepted them as currency. Would they have accepted them? So your point about the U.S. dollar, to me, that resembles a criticism of free markets in general. Yeah, the government could, and the government has gone after gold too. This is where I think the crypto part of the cryptocurrency has an advantage, at least for now. Again, it could be they could just come for it. I mean, we see that people would put under FDR, people would store money under the mattress. There was all sorts of things because there was a genuine threat of that, and gold and stuff like that. And the cost of crypto is probably the cost of savings. As Duncan pointed out, you dig up gold and put it in a vault, has storage costs, but storing value is expensive. So that also has problems. I don't see a clear solution for capital S. I just think crypto in general is part of a solution in some version of the future, some non-total dystopian version of the future. So if anyone wants to comment, they can.
Yes, I mean that's really my attitude towards it, is that it's a wonderful invention. I think that it's going back to what we were saying at the beginning, really, that it's got a lot of people thinking about the money that they use, and is there an alternative? And maybe the technology will, maybe it is the basis of a technology which will provide something better to circumvent the state's predations in the future. I don't know. I certainly think we're better off that it exists than it does not exist. I think it's certainly been a positive invention. It is, going back to the thing about the US dollar, it is very difficult, I think, to get to wean people off their existing currency, and that's one reason why, as Swithin said, dollars might be around to stay for quite a while. And of course, you have to compare, compared to what? I mean, every other currency in the world at the moment is not really much better, and I think probably in the medium term, if it's likely that other fiat currencies will probably deteriorate faster, and the dollar might appreciate under that circumstance, because as people rush to change all of their other failing currencies for dollars, and then later you might get a dollar collapse. So we're having to take a very sort of long view as to how things could turn out.
No, that was primarily my point. I wasn't saying that no currency could ever remove the dollar from its hegemonic position. It's just that it's going to take quite a lot to knock the dollar off. That's all my point is. I don't think it's not decisive. Not that they're going to stay there forever, but as long as, as you point out, Duncan, Zimbabwe, I think, still basically uses the US dollar as its currency, because despite all the US dollar's manifest failings, it was better than the Zimbabwean dollar. I'm pretty sure as well Venezuela uses loads of US dollars as well. My brother was there a couple of years ago, and they just did all the transactions in US dollars to a large extent. So yeah, the dollar can go, but it's going to take a significant amount of time. Oh, an interesting speculation on the side. Oh no, that's not going to happen. I was going to say the extent to which the Western governments try to wean everybody off oil could be a problem for the U.S. dollar, because the dollar demand would collapse because because the oil trading would be nowhere near as valuable as it was. But the future of electrified world, especially for industrial production and construction, I think is still very far ahead of us. So that's another reason to expect dollar demand to stay relatively high. Just two more things I neglected to say with respect to Bitcoin, which I think is interesting and relates to the security aspect of gold versus crypto. Is one thing with crypto is if you lose your password, you lose your money. Assuming Bitcoin can be money, or your medium of exchange, you can lose them. Now, of course, you can say, well, you just learn and the culture changes and that doesn't happen. That's fine. But I kind of think people can forget stuff. Or you might have a house fire or something, and where you'd written your password burns up. And one thing as well, typically with these, you would have done an astonishingly complicated password to make sure no one can get it to get in. Or your password might be the wrong word, but that's a chance. So I think that's one thing. And at least at present, which I think is particularly interesting, there was a debate between Michael Saylor and Frank Giustra on gold versus crypto. And the most interesting thing that Frank Giustra said was that if you look at Bitcoin's performance, it's actually positively correlated with the stock market performance. Whereas gold tends to increase in value, at least it has since probably the post-Second World War period, does well when the stock market goes down, which would potentially indicate that gold is considered the safe haven asset today. Now, that's an asset and it's not really used as money, but it would be interesting to see how that operates maybe next financial crisis time, and to see if it's the same thing. Obviously, crypto is new, so it might not have developed those sort of features that gold has and been sort of negatively correlated with stocks and things. But I did think that that's worth noting, especially in the context of store of value and sort of security when it comes to gold vis-a-vis crypto.
It's worth pointing out that on the learning of the fact that the Republicans would lose control of the Senate, the stock market went down, from my understanding, and Bitcoin et al. Went through the roof. So again, it's Bitcoin's life cycle, and all the other competitors, Ethereum, Stellar Lumens, Litecoin, Dogecoin, whatever you want. There's lots of them. Maybe they should be given a chance to at least get off the ground. I mean, this to me is a diagonal innovation, not a direct innovation. It's not the car didn't exactly replace the horse nor the bicycle, but they both replaced them in diagonal ways. So and maybe we'll go back to horses. So I do think there's a certain primitivist scenario which all modern finance just falls apart. I mean, including earning interest outside of like straight up, outside like some kind of serfdom. Or so in that regard, I think modern finance in general would, to some extent, would go away. So a lot of the sort of like, the Peter Schiff, Ron Paul impending collapse, that could happen. But then I think we're all I still think when you say value, and this is I've thought about this, where does value come from? One Bitcoiner said that Bitcoin wins if people start denoting the U.S. dollar. How many dollars can you buy with a Bitcoin instead of the other way around? Now it's an equalitative equation, but the point is not how many Big Macs can you buy with a Bitcoin? It's from that standard, Bitcoin has done quite, a very small amount. I think the first pizza took like over 1 million Bitcoins. Now you could do it for like 0.00001. So it has gotten there. It has gotten off the ground. So the dollar might just be around, but then to me that's just an argument against free markets in general, not an argument against crypto, which I would say is a modern version of free market money. That's my relatively mild case that I'm making. So I'm probably finished here what I'm saying. If you guys have any final comments, you can add them. Thanks for being on, Duncan. Great article, by the way. I do think it's interesting talking about it. And actually, the more interestingly enough, if the subjective theory of value is true, the more people talk about crypto, it could be the more it has value. So thanks again for the great article.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you liked it. And yes, I think it is important. I think just in general, just to emphasize what I said earlier, is that people start talking more about money and where does money come from, and where does its value come from, and why have we always been using these little pieces of paper with picture of, well, in our case, the Queen on. No, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say.
No, that's fine. Your point about the strangeness of using pieces of paper, the fiat, for all the criticisms made of the Bitcoin, the fiat system, in a way, unless you totally buy into the power of the state, which in that regard is fairly rational, then the MNTers are entirely correct and the Keynesians are entirely correct, and the state should actually inflate its money. If people are just going to accept, even if prices go up and purchasing power goes, you have to use more of them. The first round, the state always wins this game. So in that regard, Bitcoin is a rebellion. It is kind of people taking sovereignty, freedom of money. It is a kind of yeah. The fiat system is kind of strange. Maybe no one would accept a long, complicated code. Although you can forget your bank. You can forget your bank account code. And in theory, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't read up on the history of this. But that would just be an argument against the inhumanity of air quote man, or capitalism. Again, I'm a capitalist, but I don't particularly think that it's humane or inhumane. I just think it's a sort of the rational system, it's a default system. So as far as forgetting your codes, yeah, that could happen. I mean, you could also run awry of the state. I mean, I think Alex Jones and various other people aren't allowed to use Swift payments or something like that. So now again, this could happen to Bitcoin too. So yes, sovereignty of money. That's a key point. I totally agree with. So, Ethan, do you have any comments? I think we should probably finish this up.
Just to emphasize, the point about money, where money comes from, what's the point of it, and asking a few more questions as to how the state finances its astonishing deficits with pure paper, and bringing home to people that despite money in a sense growing on trees in the current monetary system, that printing more money doesn't create more wealth, and crypto can be very helpful in demonstrating this to the masses. I'd just like to thank Duncan for joining us again, and I would recommend checking out his essay Crypto Skepticism on misesuk.org. And just now I'd like to thank everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed this, please share it with your friends and family. And please subscribe to us on Podbean and on YouTube. The more subscribers we get, the higher we get in the ratings, the more people can hear the show. And if you'd like to contact the show for any reason, please contact us at mindcrimelibертyshow@gmail.com. That's mindcrimelibертyshow@gmail.com.